Hello, my name is Joan Connell. I'm an MPH student from the University of Colorado School of Public Health. In the next few minutes, I would like to spend some time discussing the emergency response to the Boston Marathon bombing. This presentation will begin with a brief review of the timeline of major events. It will discuss key players involved in the disaster response, as well as a focus of the public health response and the community's response to this disaster. Finally, we'll conclude by discussing some recommendations that were made based on the response and some actions that have occurred in response to those recommendations. As you can see, the Boston Marathon bombing was the introductory event to this 5-day disaster that's depicted in this timeline. This marathon began uneventfully on 9 a.m. on Monday, April 15th, with the first bombing occurring at 2:49 p.m. That afternoon, with the second bomb detonated several seconds later. Within about 40 minutes, the last critical patient had been transported to a local hospital away from the bombing. Within just a few hours after that first bombing, the castle was opened as an assistance center for runners. This remained open for approximately 28 hours. On Thursday, 3 days after the bombing, the FBI was able to release photos of the suspects. This was followed by the police department of Cambridge responding to a carjacking in their community early Friday morning. This led to a firefight that ultimately resulted in the death of one of the suspects and the fleeing of the second suspect. A system-wide transit shutdown was enacted a few hours later, as well as a recommendation for a shelter-in-place. The shelter-in-place request was lifted after approximately 13 hours due to the concern that the suspect had fled the area. Shortly after that request was lifted, a resident from Watertown actually reported seeing an individual hiding in his boat located on his residence. 2 hours after that report was made, the second suspect was apprehended. This timeline does not depict the reopening of Boylston Street, where the bombings occurred. This began with a ceremony on Monday, April 22nd, followed by many city agencies performing marathon infrastructure cleanup, then local residents and business owners being allowed back onto the street in an organized, staged manner. This concluded with the street being reopened at 3 a.m. on Wednesday, April 24th. This timeline also does not include the long-term post-disaster behavioral health interventions that have occurred long after the suspect was taken into custody. As we review the Boston Marathon route, we see that the marathon traverses the 8 cities of Hopkinton, Ashland, Framingham, Natick, Wellesley, Newton, Brookline, and concludes on Boylston Street in Boston. The local, state, and federal participants had actually been active participants long before the bombs were detonated that day. These groups, which include governmental and non-governmental agencies, work together in the plan development as well as participating in drills for a mass casualty incident for years, using the annual Boston Marathon as an opportunity for a drill. Regarding the medical system, marathon providers adapted and transitioned from dealing with runner casualties to mass casualties in both triage and treatment groups. Ambulance companies responded to ICS orders with transport to particular hospitals ordered by Metro Boston Central Medical Emergency Direction. Local hospitals engaged well-rehearsed disaster plans. Public health, local, state, and federal agencies cooperated with each other to share information and coordinate resources. The Medical Intelligence Center coordinated efforts and shared information between public health and healthcare organizations, including notifying hospitals of incoming surges of patients, supply needs, security updates, and available services for victims. The Department of Neighborhood Development, Boylston, helped with the Boylston Street reopening and assisting businesses. Private sector partners and non-governmental associations, including the Boston Athletic Association, also participated in this response, and the mayor's office provided coordinated public information. State players included the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, which ran the Multi-Agency Coordination Center. This served as a coordination point for representatives involved in the marathon. And because of this, they were able to maintain constant communication with Emergency Operations Center in each of the 8 cities located along the marathon course. The Massachusetts Statewide Interoperability Executive Committee was comprised of communication unit leaders and technicians, and they had held statewide interoperability plan meetings annually to optimize their communication systems so they could speak to each other at times of disaster. Boston representatives did participate in these sessions, and because of this, they were able to use a variety of communication means in a very effective way. The State Health Department, I already mentioned, served as an information conduit. The Massachusetts National Guard was initially assigned to traffic and crowd control, but was reassigned to provide crime scene perimeter support as well as conduct safety missions in the transit stations over the next 5 days. The governor's office actually provided coordinated public information along with the mayor's office. There was a regional response plan which included the states of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. And they had already developed a plan specific to improvised explosive devices, which was what was used at the bombing that day. They implemented this plan using an IED annex, which organized the coordinated deployment of resources from that whole area to the bombing site. Federally, the National Weather Service transitioned from their role at the marathon of providing weather information to the role post-bombing of determining if the bomb released toxins and chemicals. The FBI became involved when the Boston Police Department turned over the bombing investigation. FEMA became involved when the president proclaimed an emergency declaration, which was actually quite complicated because this was not a natural disaster. Once involved, FEMA provided emergency police personnel, search and rescue, and staff that helped remove health and safety hazards. FEMA also provided funding for shelters and emergency care for Norfolk and Suffolk counties, which were primarily used by residents whose homes had been impacted during the blast or those who could benefit from crisis counseling. As depicted in the slide, you can also see how FEMA brought together many other federal organizations to help support survivors. As far as non-governmental organizations involved in the response, the American Red Cross worked with the Massachusetts Attorney General's Office, the Massachusetts Office of Victims Assistance, Health and Human Security, the Boston Operations and Emergency Management, and Boston Public Health to staff family assistance centers. The Boston Athletic Association had participated in the Boston Marathon annually and continued to provide support. Faith-based organizations also provided support to their community, especially in the aftershock. There were many, many other non-governmental associations involved. Now I'd like to take a few minutes to focus on the public health response. Immediately, nearly 200 local health department workers were already on site in preparation for the race, keeping in mind that this race served as an annual mass casualty exercise. Prior to the bombings, these healthcare personnel had already coordinated about 70 transports related to race injuries. Within the first 30 minutes after the bombing, the health department and associated medical personnel treated over 140 people and coordinated transport for another 90 people to local hospitals. In fact, within 1 minute of the first bombing, it was a medical tent worker who notified the Emergency Operations Center. It was because of this successful execution of the emergency preparedness plan that patients could be successfully treated, and the outcome was as successful as it was. Within the next few hours after the bombing, the Stephen Lawler Medical Intelligence Center helped coordinate with local hospitals to connect patients with loved ones. And by 7:30 Monday evening, the health department and its partners had opened the drop-in center called the Castle that I referred to in the timeline. And this offered counseling and support for everyone and assistance for the runners who were visiting from a distance. In the following days, public health continued to provide mental health counseling and support. And some of that support is ongoing. They also helped organize donations and other offers of assistance. For example, they dispatched counselors to schools and community groups. They held meetings with fellow first responders to respond to the after crisis events. They also organized large gatherings, including some vigils. They also helped take some of the directly affected patients and their families to the bombing site to deal with some of the trauma. State health workers also coordinated additional blood supplies from Rhode Island and helped other hospitals find additional hospital equipment that was necessary in dealing with the onslaught of patients. And state health workers also sent information to other states about how to help their returning marathon participants or visitors in dealing with their crisis once they got home. When we look at how the community dealt with this bombing, we see a great amount of resilience. And we have to attribute this to the Boston Office of Public Health Preparedness. This office trains 2,500 to 3,000 professionals each year, including a medical reserve corps that has at least 800 credentialed volunteers. When you think of this, it's quite remarkable given that 50% of Boston's population falls under vulnerable status due to age, socioeconomic status, social, cultural, and language issues. Furthermore, Boston is very segregated, and there are some neighborhoods with these vulnerable populations that have very little access to healthful options and also a huge amount of crime. The Boston Office of Public Health Preparedness has responded to this by providing grants for community-based organizations to improve the resiliency. Some of these grants have resulted in neighborhood-based trauma response teams that train community members to respond to local disasters, including shootings and weather issues, and this results in a faster, more effective response within a community. This has resulted in meeting several of the 5 components of community resilience requirements. The Boston Office of Public Health Preparedness has also been in charge of running these drills focused on immediate disaster impacts, and they are responsible for utilizing the Boston Marathon as a mass casualty drill opportunity. Now, all their work is threatened due to chronic federal underfunding to maintain these programs that they've started. Because of the decreased federal funds, they're not going to be able to support many of these essential things that contribute to Boston's remarkable response to this disaster. This is further challenged by the fact that Boston is a very large population center, needs to divvy up these funds amongst more people compared to smaller Massachusetts communities with smaller populations. Now, after the bombing and the disaster response, an after action report was completed, which deemed the disaster response a huge success because of everything we have just discussed. However, they did have some recommendations to make the response even better in the future. And many of these recommendations have actually been resulted in some changes. One of the recommendations was the need to have long-term follow-up for patients who require physical and emotional care, and those programs are ongoing. Another recommendation was to activate local emergency operations centers in support of the marathon instead of just pieces of those centers, and that has been done in all 8 cities. Another recommendation includes creating an integrated all-hazard public safety plan for each Boston Marathon. And responses to that include a pre-marathon training and exercise program that was developed specifically to address public safety personnel. And as of 2016, over 1,800 people have been trained, including 500 police officers, firefighters, EMTs, and paramedics. They also developed a marathon public safety functional exercise, and this tested the ability of the multi-agency coordination center to coordinate this public safety with all of the other players. Another recommendation involved enhanced security for marathon courses for runners and spectators. And indeed, the security involved along the marathon course is more detailed now. But in addition to that, the Department of Homeland Security developed a See Something, Say Something campaign to teach spectators and marathon participants to respond to things that seem unusual. This ad campaign is actually being utilized along with banners put on along the entire marathon trail and advertisements regarding the See Something, Say Something campaign regularly being run beginning several days prior to the start of the marathon. Recommendations were also made to improve the emergency patient tracking system, and through innovation through a great number of businesses, we've come up with quite a few different things. We now have the People Locator website that involves photo mapping, the Google Person Finder, and the Facebook Safety Check that have been developed to help find loved ones. A web-based patient tracking program is also being used clinically to improve the emergency patient tracking system. There was also recommendations to improve communications, including the utilization of the Massachusetts Tactical Channel Plan by all agencies, as well as making social media responses by agencies more uniform. To that, the Joint Information Center now includes an on-site social media unit with representatives from a number of agencies, and they've also set up a Boston Marathon Twitter. Finally, there was an issue with short battery life of portable communications equipment, and this was responded to by supplying power and battery trailers along the route of the marathon. In conclusion, you can see that overall the response to the Boston Marathon bombing disaster was remarkable. That was due to the emergency preparedness events that had occurred prior to the bombing, including using the Boston Marathon as a regular drill for disaster. Because of the response of governmental and non-governmental agencies and the Boston community, many lives were saved. Because of recommendations that were made, we now have further changes that have been made to improve our disaster response. Thank you.